Next up, coming up onto the live stream is Tommy Arthur. Come on up, Tommy. You guys should know Tommy by now. Oh, look, somebody finally brought me a beer.
Somebody finally brought you a beer, huh?
Tommy is a partner, co-owner of Lost Abbey, Port, the Hop Concept.
Yeah, all the above.
And soon to be maybe kombucha. We were talking about that yesterday.
Yeah, sake bucha.
Yeah, you're very interested in the kombucha space, it seems.
Maybe not. It is probiotic and it is sour, right?
And very uninterested in hazy IPAs.
So I brought you one. No, just kidding.
I appreciate it.
Nice.
Well, Tommy is a legend in the beer space. I guess I'll just kind of start with an easy one. What's the latest and greatest with Port and the Lost Abbey?
So we just put out a new Lost Abbey beer called Sin Citrus, or Citrus Sin. It's a blood orange, Foder barrel-aged kind of thing. It's about 6.5% alcohol, so we're pretty excited about that. It's the end of the summer season in San Diego, but perfect drinking beer for this type of weather. So,
is it ever the end of the summer season in San Diego?
If you say so, yeah.
I mean,
it does get cold from time to time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, back in Boston, summer is like a 2-week span. So.
Yeah, I go to Seattle from time to time. I think their summer's about a week, so yeah, it doesn't rain.
So how much are you guys going to actually put out this year?
I think we'll be north of 16,500 barrels or so. That's up from last year, about 2,000 barrels, probably over what we did last year. A lot of that's attributed to can business, both the Port Brewing cans and the Hop Concept cans that we kicked out.
Now, cans have, really taken off, especially in our neck of the woods in New England, but curious to see, from your perspective, where that's all trending in California. Are people lining up for these can releases and waiting 2 hours to take a case home? I mean, what's the status?
It's interesting in San Diego. We don't have a big $20 4-pack double dry hopped sort of culture. It's interesting to me because that exists in a lot of other markets.
Yeah.
And I know there's a big push up in LA, and some of the LA breweries do really well by that. But I don't see a ton of that in San Diego currently.
Why haven't you guys explored it?
We have an expensive portfolio of beers on the Abbey side already, and I think that we'd be tackling a different market and trying to go to a different set of consumerism. So we've built, a high-level consumerism with the high-end beers that we produce on the Abbey side, and I'm not certain that we could sort of do that on the Port or the Hop Concept side as well.
Yeah. Now, yesterday we were chatting for our podcast, which will come out soon, and we mentioned this at the end of our broadcast yesterday. We are launching a podcast, so you'll get to hear Tommy. I don't want to give too much of what we talked about away, but we talked a lot about imitation and the sort of like Me Too brands that exist and brewing hazy IPAs just because they're popular. Maybe kind of walk me through your thought process when it comes to innovation and the types of trends that you want to follow or not follow, and how you guys approach that.
I think it's important when we talk about being in the business that we have a real long conversation about brand identity. And I think that's what we were really sort of harping on yesterday, where I was talking about was how difficult it is to stand out in what amounts to be, for me, a really heavily sea of imitation right now. There's a lot of Me Too. People are doing things that are very duplicitous. And I think that the Great American Beer Festival this year showcases that at a very high level. All of these hazy beers now having a home at the Great American Beer Festival, and these categories are super large. But the real question is can you determine where they come from? Do they have a sense of place, or are they just ubiquitous? And I think that's a big part of for me, the imitation component to it.
And that's why you won't do a hazy IPA, even though you have a brand in the Hop Concept, which, from where I sit, it really lends itself to doing the 4-pack, $20 4-pack hazy IPA. You've got a perfect vehicle for it. Yeah. Why not explore it?
I think we're going to start looking at some of the methodologies, some of the hopping processes, and specific to the Hop Concept brand, and look to make a new beer around the methods. But I'm not a fan of the chunkier it is, the bigger, the worse it looks, the better the beer. So I believe in the quality of some of the hopping, and the way that the hopping is done can be beneficial to the brand itself. And that's something we're internally tackling on an R&D level right now. But I don't see us participating in come get it because this week we used Mosaic and Simcoe instead of Citra and Mosaic.
Gotcha. So where does IPA go from here? You've been around making IPAs for almost 30 years now. We've seen all kinds of different variations. It was West Coast was, the sort of pinnacle of IPA for a long time. And then there was red IPAs and white IPAs and black IPAs.
Don't forget the blonde ones.
Don't forget the blonde ones. Yeah. That now it's hazy. We hear a little bit about these brute IPAs out here. Where does IPA go?
I think the brute thing's got some interesting notions to it. I was talking to one of our suppliers from, or one of our sales reps from Brewer Supply Group on the way into town. I'm intrigued by the notion of the brute, the enzyme working across a lot of platforms, because I think that while it works in the IPA space, taking all the malt out of IPA is something that a lot of West Coast brewers did for many, many years. But I'm intrigued by the possibility of the enzyme being something that actually takes malt staling out of the equation, and I'm not sure if there's science yet to support whether having no malt or no residual sugar will make the beer more stable. And it's something I think that we talk about. We know that beer stales, and we know that malt oxidizes and hops oxidize, but if there's no malt or no residual sugar left, does that mean that the beer will be more stable in the long run? And if so, is that where IPA will go, where all IPA will be brewed with the enzyme in order to basically make it more stable on a shelf?
Interesting. And that would, it seems to me, have a lot of implications for direct-to-consumer business as well. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Drizzly and e-commerce and just kind of the future of how to get beer from the brewery to the drinker. And the current system, as everybody knows, 3-tier going through the wholesaler, it's a complex business, and the wholesalers serve a great purpose, but increasingly consumers want to buy direct. They want to be able to get beer that maybe not be distributed in their area. And so the thing holding that back is, one, freshness, shelf stability, and two, just the sheer weight of shipping beer. And it seems like innovation like this could actually open the doors to some more direct shipping.
Yeah, we did a really good job in the last 20 years of educating the consumer and explaining to them why beer should be kept cold, why IPA should be drank fresh, and all of those things. But now you have a tremendous amount of new breweries who are hyper-focused on those things, right? You got to come to the brewery to buy it because we're controlling it. We canned it this morning, and you can buy it this afternoon. And they're removing that uncertainty from it. The consumer wants the best beer, and they're being told now that the best way to do that is to go right to the source, and the shorter the distance is a good thing. The question is can we ship beer across state lines? Can we ship it across city line? How do you get the freshest beer? Because that's ultimately what the consumer's looking for.
Yeah. Do you see that as a positive or a negative? Just kind of how things have shifted on the freshness scale. That, hey, that beer that was made 30 days ago, that's no longer fresh. Is that a positive or a negative?
It's a little maddening. I mean, we certainly know that there's beers in our portfolio that after 30 days, they do not start expressing a massive downhill slide, right? We know they're still very much amounts to be in code and very drinkable. Are they hyper fresh? No, but this business wasn't built around that, and maybe this is a pivot point where if you're going to be in the IPA space, that's the only way you can do it. But you can't live in the IPA space as a distributed brand if you can't have 90 to 120 days of code length. So the real question is what do we as producers need from the consumer, and do we need the consumer to come to us at the brewery to buy it so that it's 7 days old, or do we need them to buy it at 30 days old out in the market?
Yeah. We've talked about opportunity, and we even touched on this in the podcast, risk-taking. It seems like you're very risk-averse. You like to be a little bit more patient with the opportunities that present themselves and the ones that you actually capitalize on. Do you worry ever that there are things that you passed on that you should have gone after?
I think that, looking back, and then sort of hindsight is always, something that you're aware of. You think about what could have been, but our job is to kind of look towards the future. And I think right now it's hard to look at the future and know with a real good sense of where you want to be. When we opened the brewery 12 years ago with the two brands, we knew why we were doing that. We had these two opportunities to keep these brands separate, and we knew what kinds of beers we needed to make in order to participate in the greater picture. Now that there's 7,000 breweries in this country and everybody's doing the same stuff, it's a lot harder to stand out, and it's a lot harder to know looking forward where you're supposed to be. So I think being a little conservative on things is not a bad thing in that regard.
Yeah, 900, almost 950 breweries in California now, over 150 breweries in San Diego County, approaching 7,000. I think Bart said yesterday there will be 7,000 breweries in the United States before the year is up. How do you stand out if you're a brand that's been around for a while like yours?
Yeah, and I asked that question in the Joe Whitney's talk with Sierra Nevada yesterday. How does a brand that's 30 years old, stay relevant? And it's something that a lot of breweries have to deal with. Are you a heritage brewery? Are you a legacy brewery? Are you a 3-year-old in the market? And everybody that's 3 years and younger is having a lot of success just because they're new. And the question becomes, how do you go from being shiny and new to being dull and old? And I think that's part of that patience thing for us is you got to have a sense of the long tail. You got to really know that if you're in this business, you've got to build it for the longer picture. But it isn't easy. That's clearly the case these days.
Yeah, we just were talking with Tony Bowker, and he described the beer business as a jungle now, and there are all sorts of different animals in the jungle. Some are big, some are small. But he said that in order to be successful, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but in order to be successful, you have to be a really smart animal and know where to find your food. And I really did appreciate that analogy that there are 7,000 different animals in the jungle now, and if you want to eat, you got to be really, really smart. So knowing that that's the sort of analogy that he used to describe the beer industry, what kind of animal are you? And how do you hunt?
I think we're a patient animal. So let's assume that we're, that we like to stalk our prey, and that we kind of, we take our shots when we need to. I'm fascinated by the beer business right now because we just went through a crazy phase where money was super cheap, and so you could go out and expand at a rate at a banking level. Money was cheap. Money came into the space from outside, big company money, private equity money. And then we also have this interesting thing going on with the legalization of marijuana in California now, and whether or not that's going to, so where do we hunt in the past and where do we hunt in the future, I think are two very different things.
Are you going to hunt in the cannabis sector at all?
No, I've never smoked in my life, and I don't really feel compelled to get into that. I told people a long time ago I wasn't going to get into distilling either because I love booze, but I don't need to be in the distilling business to be in the alcohol business. So
you're just beer all the way.
I don't know. Maybe we're getting the kombucha space.
I like it. Well, we got a couple of minutes here before we kick it to commercials. But, a question that I like to ask folks like yourself, people that have been around a while, people that spend a large portion of their day thinking about, how to improve their business, how to remain successful is, what keeps you up at night? What has you scratching your head?
I would think right now that one of the biggest hurdles for us is the operating of a business in California is quite difficult. We're chasing $15 per hour on minimum wage.
Yep.
We have an enormous amount of regulatory compliance that kicks in. I mean, the alcohol business alone, but in California we have a lot of environmental things. I know our sewage and wastewater stuff's going to get us at some point. We're seeing a lot of breweries in Southern California specifically that are being tackled by the wastewater side of stuff and just environmental stewardship and things like that. So it's expensive to do business in California.
So do you look outside of California for potential future growth then, at least on the operational side?
No, we're not looking outside. It's just really about how can we get really efficient in what we do and in our local, or San Diego-based company. How can we be better in San Diego? We sell about 80% of all of our beer in California in dollars. So we're certainly a California first company.
Yeah. So where do you go from here? What's next for Port? What's on the horizon?
I think the biggest thing for us is finding some stability. I mean, because this is a jungle and there's a lot of weird stuff going on. Some level of predictability in your operation basis or your sales basis. We've seen some really wicked curves and spikes and things, and it feels like a boomerang on some levels. Like, we were able to throw that boomerang out, and now it's coming back at a very different rate. We grew at a time when growth was available to everybody, and now how much growth is available to us year over year. It's something I think that Bart really hammered home yesterday.
Yeah. Well, that is all the time we have, and we're going to kick it to commercials. But, Tommy, you are a wealth of knowledge all the time, every time I talk to you. Really appreciate it.
And I brought you a beer.
And you brought me beer, so that is a huge win for me. I just asked this to Tony, but will we see you in Santa Monica at Brewbound Live this year?
That's end of November?
End of November.
It's entirely possible I'll make the roadie.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, if you do make it, let's have a beer.
Let's hook up and have some beers.
All right.
Perfect, bud. Thanks,
Cheers.
Chris.